and looking for Jackie. Hold on 1 minute. Okay, trying to unmute Jackie because I'm trying to find Jackie. You're with us? Just give me a moment. There's a lot of people here and I have to find Jackie. And I apologize for any delay. I found Jackie. Wonderful. Okay, Jackie's muted at this point, trying to unmute. And I'll ask my co-host at Vermont.
Hello?
Wonderful. Thank you, Jackie.
Oh my goodness. Woo, trying to mute me that's a trick. Thank you so much for the privilege of being able to kick off this amazing event. The work that all of you do to support and educate and encourage youth with disabilities and learning challenges is inspirational. You help unlock the door to new pathways. Over the last 7 months, in particular, you have demonstrated such creativity, quick responsiveness, patience, willingness to learn, humor, support for each other. It's actually so humbling to be here. You all do amazing work. Next slide, please. So my name is Jackie Kelleher. I am your state director. What is that? I'll explain in a moment. Right now, it seems to be putting out fires. Anyone with me with the firefighting? You can relate. I have the fortunate opportunity to serve you along with the talented special ed team at the Agency of Ed. And we aspire to live up to this vision that you see before you. I'm particularly interested in access, equity, and opportunity for post-secondary education. And I'd like to say a few words about considering post-secondary educational opportunities for students with disabilities today, based on lessons learned. Next slide, please. So across the nation, state directors of special ed are looking for resources and strategies and promising practices regarding transition. And the state director is responsible for ensuring the successful implementation of the law, but also about the education of students with disabilities to ensure they meet their post-secondary goals to live, learn, work, and participate in their communities. This is a top priority. Next slide, please. It's a job that's been very challenging in the last several months, navigating through uncharted waters with you all. And I think what has sustained us and will continue to help us strengthen our system is the work that we're doing to create these strong partnerships with authentic stakeholders. You are key stakeholders, and our kids are our priority. Next slide, please. So to kind of give you an overview of the job, there's a lot of moving pieces, and it's a job I never dreamed would be possible. Earning a doctorate and living a life dedicated towards building learning opportunities and environments where individuals with disabilities are accepted, supported, and empowered to live self-determined lives. Amazing, but that wasn't my reality. I have some things to share with you about my background and how I got here. So in high school, you know how you have valedictorians and salutatorians, you know, the first and second place students in school. I graduated last in my class. Maybe not last, but definitely at the bottom. Oh my goodness. I was a horrible student. I was engaged in behaviors that could get me kicked out of class so quickly, or I was one of those high school students that you gave me the hall pass, I wouldn't come back. I played connect the dots on my SATs. I was the reluctant, resistant learner. Always seemed lost. I was always missing information, always couldn't follow instructions. I couldn't get information into my head. So I had reactive behaviors. I did what I could to avoid school at any cost. Guidance counselors by the end, they were guiding me maybe towards customer service. I'm still missing a math class from high school. I don't know, they kind of let me go off into the world. After high school, I became a professional waitress. I washed dishes, I sold books, I joined a band. Yep, I was even a backup singer. Connected with the lead singer, then the kids started to arrive. Amazing how that happens. We were struggling. You know, I got married young at that point. We were struggling. We were working minimum wage jobs. I had heard that you could make more money than serving tables as a substitute teacher. Isn't this embarrassing? This is how I get into education. I heard you could make more money, but I wasn't college material. That had been made very clear. There had been no high expectations for me to go into college. I barely made it out of high school, but I was desperate. I somehow got into a state school that at the time was everybody's safety school. I had to sign a conditional admit form that basically said, Kelleher, if you breathe the wrong way, you're out of here. So I began college, post-secondary. I have no skills. I have no study skills. I have no note-taking abilities. I have no time management abilities. I have nothing that. But I did have one thing, and that was motivation. I was so afraid they were going to kick me out. I had to do something. I became obsessed with learning how to learn. All the years of not being able to put things into my head, I learned how to record lectures and supplement notes, how to use drawing and art to reinforce understanding of systems, the magic of mnemonics. I even created my own mnemonics set to Disney tunes and trying to make the foreign familiar. Hakuna Matata? Oh no, medulla oblongata, thank you, yes. The person who could not master academics did master the art of learning how to learn. And I did ended up graduating the top 10 of my undergrad psychology program. And I was mad about it because being successful in post-secondary education was not a GPA or an SAT score. If I could do it, anyone could do it. And with the support of learning strategies and supports, the unobtainable became obtainable. And I knew I had to share this with others, particularly with students in school who are experiencing shame and lack of confidence and stress over the learning process. There was hope. But what was this field, you know, that I had become so passionate about? And this is really interesting. I asked around and I kept getting the same answer. Special education, special education, special education. That's a place, isn't it? You know, this was a little while back, but that was, you know, my perception at that point. It was a place. I didn't know. Whatever it was, I had to explore it further. And to run my mouth and scream the power of adapting content and methods and strategies for students in need, I had to get a PhD. And I was on fire for education and getting the word out that there were solutions for those who struggled. And so I did go further into higher education and getting that master's and that doctorate. And my focus became special education. Now, it may or may not be a surprise to you, but along this journey, I was identified as an adult, as an individual with disabilities. I had struggled all those years and had hated that place called school. I had been engaged in behaviors to get myself removed from where I felt most ashamed. I had hidden disabilities that I had been able to mask and hide under the radar. But I had found a way through this process of learning to compensate for those learning deficits. And now I've been given the privilege and the opportunity to share my knowledge and passion as a career. So I became empowered with the law and wanting to be an advocate for kids and really help to connect those dots and bridge those gaps in the learning process. And through higher education, I explored and discovered so many things, unlocked so many doors. And I'm very passionate about all students with disabilities having that option if they so desire. Next slide, please. So removing the barriers, paving the way for positive change. finding out how each learner can succeed given their own unique needs. It's like CSI, identifying those causal factors serving as barriers and being clinical and scientific about finding the right solution that allows for access, equity, and opportunity for all. And we're coming together and we're removing those barriers, particularly when it comes to post-secondary outcomes for the next generation of learners. And we need to step outside the box. Next slide, please. I am going to skip this one for just a moment and come back to it if time allows. So if we could skip to the next slide, please. Thanks. I just gave a personal share, but I also wanted to share that, and for some of you who have listened to the Vermont Family Network webinars, is that I have been able to raise 4 children with disabilities through the power of post-secondary transition planning and partnerships with the IEP team. 2 of my children with autism and attention deficit have been able to be successful in college and actually graduated this past May. And it was through that learning strategies, preparation, and some of the things that I'm about to share with you that we were able to be successful. And so I want to continue to share that story of hope as a parent who have kids who are going for their dreams. They have a life towards independence and self-reliance as a result of the work in school. Next slide, please. So I was able to work with students with disabilities in college and have made some connections to share with you on how we can ensure others have this opportunity if they want. I think post-secondary training with support is an important option for our kids. Next slide, please. So this is what I want to talk about today, is raising the expectations. We've got to address some of the challenges and talk about some of the solutions about considering post-secondary college and training for students with disabilities. Next slide, please. So why talk about it? Because continued education after high school often leads youth and young adults to a greater success in entering a career. Educational opportunities, we have a full range to think about. It's not just university. There are other post-secondary options, but we need to be thinking ahead and we need to be thinking early and often. It can be too late when we're 16 and 17. So I encourage folks to really think about it early and for bringing students at the table to talk about these things. Next slide, please. So obviously we know that after your 22nd birthday, the protections under the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act no longer apply. But it's important for our students and their families to get empowered with knowing about the 504 section. ADA and section 504 become in place. But it's very different. And it's a very different type of transition when you're not going for your IEP goals and progress monitoring. Nobody's looking at you in that type of lens anymore. So this is a transition, but knowing the protection under these acts is very important. Next slide, please. So here's the reality in my experiences. What are some of the challenges for students who are going into post-secondary? Quite frankly, there is professors and staff may not be prepared to work with students with disabilities. In higher education, your professors, faculty, and staff are experts in what they do, in their content. They may never have had a class in how to teach. They may never have had a class in how to work with individuals with disabilities. So that lack of preparation, can be an issue with trying to find that right match with the learning style and the learning needs of that student. Over time, I have seen things like peer attitudes being a factor, not knowing how to do accommodations, because under 504, you must ensure reasonable accommodations. But again, with that lack of preparation, not knowing how to implement or ensure those can be a challenge. And this is something to anticipate and to advocate for early on, which I'll get to in just a moment. Students lacking the college skills, student support services, maybe not focusing on the social piece, can be another challenge. Next slide, please. Disclosure and stigma that comes with being open about disabilities can be an issue. Not being prepared for self-advocacy to be able to go over what your needs are can be a major issue. And there, quite frankly, continues to be some negative attitudes from others and physical barriers on campus. Next slide, please. So it's about solutions and thinking early and often about how do we prepare our students early for the higher education experience, and how do we get our students to advocate. So let's talk about those. Next slide, please. So attending and being involved in IEP meetings with parents, what can we do to bring our students to the table? Can we be meeting early with our guidance counselors about prerequisite courses for college or post-secondary school that might be necessary? Discussing plans and goals early about what I'll do after high school, but talk about the costs related to plans and goals. Meeting about future plans, searching websites for college and post-secondary schools to learn about those requirements early in the conversation. And there are many colleges and universities that are offering specialized programs for students with disabilities, particularly colleges that have high interest programs. Some of the film schools and animation schools and computer and technology are designing support and social programs and mentoring opportunities to be able to help engage the student with a disability. So we are changing rapidly in how we support schools, support students in post-secondary. Next slide, please. Being able to practice academic adjustments. So for example, if extended time is needed for exams, the student should present a letter from the special ed department for extended time. Practice that, because they're going to have to do that with their professors. When they have accommodations and modifications, they're going to, whether it's office hours or, being able to work with the professor, they're going to have to advocate for themselves. So practice it before you get to the college environment. Try it in high school to see how it works and to get familiar with that process. Have the student identify how their condition impacts them in the classroom so they're able to talk about it and be able to advocate for themselves. Next slide, please. So that's more of the same about learning about the differences between academic adjustments in college and high school, and having that opportunity to practice and then to generalize before you go out into the real world and have to do that. Early on, before you're even ready to graduate, a couple of years before you're planning to go to school, get to know the disability services centers and the disability service provider. Learn about what kind of academic adjustments are offered. Services and academic adjustments received in high school may not be appropriate or realistic for college, and so it's time to prepare for that early, because it can be a real shock going out there without having had practice or without having the right expectations set beforehand. Next slide.
Jackie, we have.
Hello?
Hi, Jackie. We have about 5 minutes left.
Great, thank you. And then for other solutions about being able to get your documentation submitted, many of our disability services centers in post-secondary are familiar with the IEP. They're particularly looking at updated evaluation information and assessment data. Many disability coordinators have that background in evaluation and assessment and are able to translate that information into finding the needs that are appropriate for that student. but they do look at IEPs in many cases and have become well-versed in that. So get your documentation early and together and ask to go over that information with the disability service coordinators and find a match with guidelines that are provided by the school. Next slide, please. So this was just a brief, overview to just, in terms of our expectations. If our students are showing an interest or that spark, or that, just have that element of that matches academia, we need to consider it. But the planning has to go early through transition about and include advocacy as part of that planning and preparation. Next slide, please. These are all the things that you do and are very important to consider for post-secondary. What kind of supports, what kind of plans, what kind of skills do I need? And not just academic, but the functional performance areas. And as I mentioned, post-secondary environments are getting much better about learning how to accommodate many different areas, from sensory deficits, motor skills, learning style, coping skills. There are some great support opportunities that are out there. If folks would like to contact me, personally, Jackie.Kelleher at Vermont.gov. For ideas about particular programs that are out there across the country. As I said, this is a passion of mine, of being able to connect the right fit for our students. Next slide, please. Behavior and skills. These are the things that I said early on as I talked about my own lack of preparation and the things that I needed to do to be a successful college student with disabilities. These are the things that we need to be focusing on in terms of IEP goals before we're going off to college. So that time management is key, that goal setting, problem solving, self-monitoring, all of those skills is what's going to make or break that college student. And so they need to be prepared in identifying those tools and strategies, the power of mnemonics, the power of effective note-taking, the power of recording your lecture and learning how to translate it. These are skills that are going to just move barriers for them. Getting active on campus. These are the social skills that we need to build. Not all of our students have that innate understanding of how to make those connections. So we need to build those up to in terms of success. Next slide, please. So these were, just a quick overview in the short amount of time that I had to share. Just remember the AOE is in your corner. These are the technical assistance and professional development that we provide we offer that to you too. It's our students, it's our families, it's also our partners in this process, and together, collaboratively. This is our job to improve outcomes for youth with disabilities. And so in the post-secondary world, we have ideas about that too, that we would love to support you on. Next slide. So I can't do it alone. This is my amazing team that I hope that you reach out to. We're all available by email. Next slide. And this is our contact information for reaching out. Our phone number, our general email piece. It's good. So do I have one more minute?
Yes.
Okay. So I did want to share with you, I'm going to try to make this really brief. I had a slide that said frogs in a bucket. Something I learned when being in special education, I encountered so many kids that taught me every day about perceptions and perspective keeping. And one story comes out about an experience in my career when I was exploring why so many of our students were scoring blank on their statewide assessments. At one point in time, when you got your state assessment back and it said blank, it means there was not enough data to be able to get a proficiency score in any way. Oops. Sorry. I was working with some folks who were selecting the assessment for one of the reading assessments, and they selected the parable of about two frogs in a bucket. Have you heard of it? The quick version: a farm boy leaves out a pail of milk. There's a big frog and a little frog. They're hopping through the field. Boop, they hop in the bucket by accident. They can't get out. They're swimming around. Hours go by, trying, hop, jump, hop, jump, hop, jump, hop, jump. The big frog gives up, sinks to the bottom of the pail. Farewell, my friend, I'm done. Whoa, little frog, starts hopping and jumping, hopping and jumping, swimming around. Hours of trying. Little frog paddles and swims, milk thickens, turns into cream, rises to the top of the pail, and the little frog jumps up from a lump and lands out of the pail into froggy freedom. So seriously, that was selected for one of the statewide assessment pieces. So I brought it back to some of my students who historically have scored blank on their reading assessments, and I wanted to know their perspectives. So one of the questions for this reading assessment item is, what is the main idea? What is the message of this passage? Well, the first child I talked to said, well, I would have left it blank, Dr. K. No options are true. This is a story about murder. You see, the story also indicates the author's lack of knowledge about frogs. I know about frogs, and they can survive submerged in a liquid for over 24 hours. The little frog obviously killed the big frog. What do you think that lump truly was? And by the way, one should strongly consider pasteurized products. The other child with disabilities that I asked, again, who historically got blank on their assessment, I said, well, what would you have selected? I would have left that blank too, Dr. K, because I would have left the room crying. And so would anyone with a sensitivity to frog deaths. So by the time we got to the item about what is the moral of the passage, my little focus group, students with disabilities, couldn't answer any of them because the answer wasn't there. So when I finally got to what is the moral of this passage, the question asked, what is the moral of this story? And the student says to me, I would have left that blank, Dr. K. The answer is not there. The moral is that farm boys can be stupid. I'm like, what? But this is a story about frogs. What? Well, my student said, well, you started out the story that with a farm boy left out a pail of milk. Had he not done this, this never would have happened. Do these kids' answers suggest they had not enough data to determine listening comprehension or understanding of the reading? No. Yet they still scored blank on this assessment. So my point is, we need to always consider other opportunities and multiple ways to assess, to make sure we're getting the right information on our students and making sure we have a clear understanding of what they do and do not know. We also need to prepare them to enter into a world where they may not be understood. So with that, I just wanted to share that story that meant a lot to me about perspective taking, and also that falls under the other considerations. So I really appreciate your time. Again, thank you for your work. It's a privilege to be here. Feel free to email, contact us at the AOE. We look forward to continuing our partnership and do the right thing for kids. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Jackie, for your excellent presentation. It's now time for our employer roundtables by district. In just a moment, you'll be automatically sent to breakout rooms for your district. A facilitator has been appointed to each breakout room so they can share their screen and record the session onto their computer if desired. You will notice a timer when you're in your breakout session. Everyone will automatically rejoin our main session at 10:20. Enjoy your roundtable discussions. Thank you. You'll all be going in a few minutes.
Can you hear me?
I can hear you.
All the room assignments were lost. I have to ask if Adene can go on next. The room assignments were lost.
Are you speaking to me? Can everyone hear you? Yes? Okay. So is Adene available? Is Adene available? Okay, Adene has to unmute. Bear with me. Perhaps, Janice, you can stop sharing the screen for a moment so it's easier to find Adene. There's a lot of folks here. Okay, that's perfect. Thank you so much. Okay. There you go.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Hi. So
Hi.
do you need to say anything else, or do you want me to just go ahead?
I think if bear with us a moment.
Okay.
And we'll give our hosts in the background an opportunity. Bear with me. Oh, there we go. So is this the beginning of the presentation?
That's not the first slide.
Okay.
I want to bring it to slide 5, I think, is where the actual slides start.
Very good. Thank you.
Sure.
More. I believe we have one more slide prior to this, Adene.
Yep, there we go. Okay.
Okay. Thank you. Go ahead, Adene.
Hi, good morning. So this is an exercise in flexibility for me, and just bear with me because I was going through this writing times next to everything based on the other times. So I'm going to do my best to. I may have been a little bit ambitious in the things that I'm trying to share with you today, but I wanted you to have some takeaway tools. But just as an exercise in grounding yourself in empathy, and for myself too, I wanted to just start out by taking a moment to think back to your own young adulthood or teenage years, and think about that thing that was the most significant event for you. A routine or ritual, could be the prom, could be graduation, could be, for some people, it's having senior privileges. And imagine for a moment that that thing was taken away because you were in the midst of COVID-19. And just think for a moment, I think we sometimes tend to minimize some of the things that, that youth are experiencing, because we forget how impactful some of the things are that have been lost. And any of you that have spent time talking with youth know that there were a lot of losses that accumulated in the midst of this pandemic. Next. So this is a list of some of the things that we're going to go over, and we're going to be talking about the major impacts of COVID-19. We're going to be thinking about the unique nature of trauma and how it can vary with individual in terms of how they've been impacted by COVID-19 and other traumas. We're going to talk about some tips for engaging youth in new ways, recognizing that now that may be a hybrid model and that you may be seeing youth in person, but also doing a good amount of your work virtually with youth. And we're going to talk about some motivational interviewing tools that may not be new to you, but I want to just be thinking about today and conceptualizing how we can be adapting these for use in this current context of the pandemic and what youth are experiencing and feeling, and also trying to translate some of those into virtual interactions with youth. Next. So this is just a list of, this is from the International Labor Organization, just to give you a sense. These are some of the early numbers in terms of data and how youth have been impacted most by COVID-19. You'll find, this is early on, this is April to May, so early on in the pandemic, 13% were unable to access education or training, and 23.1% had stopped working. And a lot of those who had stopped their school or had work or school interrupted or disrupted said that they were almost twice as likely to be probably affected by anxiety or depression as those services were kind of went off course. Next. This is some data from the CDC, and you'll see in the green box, the first thing, the bar that you see at the top. Now keep in mind, this is for all adults that reported, and then you'll see on the side in a minute, they broke it out into youth. But during late June, 40% of US adults reported struggling with mental health or substance abuse. And you'll see how that's broken down into anxiety, depression symptoms, trauma or PTSD related symptoms, increased substance use, and those who seriously considered suicide. And then when you look at where they broke it down into youth in the article, and the article is linked at the bottom, 25.5% of those that are ages 18 to 24 reported seriously considering suicide in the previous 30 days. And 74.9% of youth reported at least one adverse mental or behavioral health symptom. And we know that the research shows that they're projecting, because there was a shortage of services for youth in regards to mental health and behavioral services prior to COVID-19, that's going to be even more so in the future. So they're projecting that there's going to be an even more significant gap between those who need services and the services that are available with mental health for youth. Next. One thing that has come up as I have looked at the differences between how youth are experiencing COVID-19 and the pandemic and how adults are experiencing it, is that a lot of them are not fearful of getting sick. And they will say, if I get sick, I know that I'm not going to get very sick and I'll be okay, or I might not even have any symptoms at all. But what they are experiencing is that their life feels like it's stopped. And a lot of them feel like the things that they were looking forward to are oftentimes not available, and they feel like their future looks bleak and they don't know when things are going to get better. And one of the ways that they are describing that in the literature is a distorted time perception. And there's actually research looking at time perception and when it gets distorted, what that means cognitively. But in terms of what we want to be thinking about and engaging youth, we want to know that there's this sense of, and maybe you can relate to this, confusing the order and time of days. How many of you have woken up and thought it was Tuesday and it was really Wednesday? I had a day, I'm not even kidding, I thought it was Saturday and I was so excited for like 30 seconds and I realized it was Wednesday because the day just seemed so slow. And the week was going slow. But for youth, they're also seeing a perceived or foreshortened future, a sense that they don't have a future, or that their future looks hopeless, or they can't even look ahead because they can't get past where they are. Time just has no meaning. And what can happen is that this can impair sequential thinking. So prior to COVID-19, we know that youth oftentimes felt like the future's knowable, controllable, guaranteed. There's a sense of invulnerability. After COVID-19, it could feel like the future feels unsafe and uncertain. And I know a lot of us as adults have felt those things also, so we can really relate to that. Next. This is a framework that comes from the trauma-informed care literature in understanding some of the differences in how individuals are impacted with trauma. So if you look at this with youth that are in the midst of COVID-19, we'll see that they all went through the same initial event of the pandemic, but some of them may have come into the pandemic with other events that they had prior to that that have kind of, COVID-19 is piled on top of, and some of them have experienced in the midst of COVID-19 lots of other events, sometimes just as significant or more significant than how they've been impacted by the actual virus. It could be related to family losses, job losses, racial tensions, discrimination, trauma related to homelessness, lots of different things that could be this event. And then there's the experience, how the individual reacts to the event. So that really varies. How youth are experiencing COVID-19 is different from youth to youth. So I think the major point that I want us to be thinking about is that I'm hearing some adults assuming that for all youth that this is experienced as a highly traumatic time, and for some it really is, and collectively this has been very traumatic to to the entire world, and certainly to all of us throughout the United States. But for individual youth, they may not see this as a trauma in the same way that adults do. So we want to be careful to be asking them and checking in with them. How have they, as an individual, experienced COVID-19, and how has it been affecting them? So what we want to be looking at is that last part of the effects, and how their body's responding, how their mind's responding, but how have their plans changed? What are they thinking about employment, and how have their plans been changed as a result of everything that's gone on in the midst of COVID-19? Next. So if you want to just take a minute and just type into the chat box, and I apologize, I can't even see the chat box right now. I can pull mine up, I think. But take a moment and put in what are the youth that you're talking with and working with saying about how they've been most impacted by COVID-19? What are they saying is the effect on them that they are struggling with the most? And I'm just going to take a moment to give people a chance to respond to that. And it could be a feeling if you want to report a feeling. Anxiety and uncertainty, social isolation, exactly. Oh, they're going through so fast, I'm having trouble reading them all. Loneliness, lack of social connections, loss of work and income, loneliness, fear of the future, things are not certain, anxiety and worry, boredom, delayed goals. Yeah, and you can see these feelings and these experiences run the gamut. And I think the interesting thing is that some youth feel like in comparison to others around them, maybe they haven't experienced the same level of trauma. And so maybe they feel like they shouldn't be feeling that bad. But I think what we want to be reminding them of is that in the midst of their daily life, some of the things that they're experiencing can lead to symptoms of anxiety and depression. If you're cut off from your friends, we know that peers find a lot of meaning in their life and their motivation through their social connections. Boredom can lead to feelings of anxiety, especially in youth, because if they feel like there's no future, they feel like they have nothing to do, nothing to focus on, it can lead to symptoms of anxiety and depression. So I thank you all for sharing, and if we can move on to the next slide, I'll keep us moving. You may have seen this before in the motivational interviewing literature. This is the OARS, a diagram of the OARS techniques. And what I want to be doing today is just thinking about how some of these can be used in the current context. And I just want to let you know that this is something that is very simple that could be implemented within the virtual relationship pretty easily. But I think when you are asking those open questions, you want to be asking specifically about how the youth have been impacted by COVID-19. How have their plans changed? How has their situation with their family been different? And just start your conversation with introducing yourself to them and saying, hey, I want to find out a little bit about you and how you are experiencing life as a youth in this period of this worldwide pandemic. How has it impacted your goals for yourself? And just invite them to share. And again, that helps you to understand where they're at so that you don't make assumptions about what they need. But these are all skills that can be implemented within the virtual relationship. And I think the most important tool that you're going to have in that relationship is the use of yourself in making eye contact with the youth, asking open-ended questions and inviting them to share and reflecting back what you're hearing. Next. So there are some things to be thinking about with technology when you are meeting virtually with youth. And one of the first things that I'm sure have all been hearing about is that some youth do not have access to technology, to what they need. And some of them lack the skills. In particular, youth with disabilities may not be as adept at engaging in virtual formats of communication. So we want to be assessing when we first meet with youth or prior to meeting to them, do they have the availability, the skills, and the comfort level. And if not, then how can you hook them up with some supports? And that support may be you just coaching them a little bit. It could be sending them some screenshots or a visual way of showing them how they can use that technology. It could be that you are hooking them up to somebody else who can give them a brief coaching session on how they can use those things. But I think you also want to be upfront with them from the beginning about the norms. So even if you're meeting once with a youth, you want to let them know what you're there for, what you expect. Do you want their camera on? Do you want it off? You can very nicely say to them, if you're finding it difficult to engage because they have their screen off, you could ask them to turn their screen on so that you can get to know them. You can ask them if they seem uncomfortable because they're right on screen and you notice that they're feeling anxious. What you could do is suggest that they move over slightly, because one thing that is recommended for youth with anxiety, in particular social anxiety, which can be magnified when you're on the Zoom screen, is that if you don't have to see yourself or don't feel like you're right in front of the screen, it can reduce anxiety. So you can suggest that they move over so that you can still see them and be present, but maybe they feel more comfortable if they don't have to look eye to eye with you in the screen. Also, you want to be letting them know what the agenda is. Let them know if they're having trouble finding a quiet space, maybe you could brainstorm with them. Maybe they can take their computer outside or something like that, but just go over the ground rules and what you expect. Next. Next slide. These are some other things to be thinking about. We want to be prioritizing the youth preferences, and some of us are not technologically savvy. It doesn't mean you have to have all the bells and the whistles, but if you are somebody who primarily likes to call youth on the phone, you want to be thinking about whether or not they're most comfortable with that way of communicating. Maybe Zoom would be better for their preferences. Maybe texting is better than talking on the phone when you have to communicate. But we want to think about what is going to be most meaningful for them. But also consider mixing up some of those activities. So just because we are in a virtual meeting space in terms of maybe delivering services doesn't mean that there aren't some additional things that we can do. And you've probably heard of teachers that are doing things like dropping off little things that they can leave with kids at home. You could send something in the mail, you could send activities and worksheets that they can engage in. You can also do some things that you can share with them through the Zoom screen that gives them an opportunity to engage with you in a different way. One thing to be thinking about along the lines of trauma-informed care is that sometimes there may be things that are a trigger for them in terms of the virtual environment. In some cases, video may have been used for sexual exploitation. So just keep that in mind if you're working with a youth and there's something that seems to be triggering to them, if they seem very uncomfortable, anxious, if when you're on the screen they suddenly log off or they start showing panic symptoms. There could be something related to the actual, some type of abuse that they've experienced in the past, but you want to be talking with them. It's a process of ongoing communication. How are they doing? How is the format that you picked working for them? And if possible, if you can learn how to use emojis, memes, GIFs, any of those things are digital forms of communication that youth tend to engage really well with. And sometimes it's like they say, a picture's worth 1,000 words. A meme or a GIF can say a lot more than youth may be able to communicate verbally. And it may help you to have a transaction that goes far beyond what you would be able to do when you're using traditional verbal or written forms of communication. Next slide. So in the midst of COVID-19, what can you do in terms of helping youth? What do you want your focus to be? And I think that one of the things that you want to be talking to them about is how have things shifted? For some youth, they have had to go to a fallback option that maybe they never expected. In some cases, family members have lost jobs, families have lost housing. Youth may be having to contribute to the family in ways that they had never anticipated. And sometimes it means that they had to maybe they had to leave a job that they enjoyed because they had to go home and take care of siblings because their parents had to work. Or maybe they weren't working and they suddenly had to work and it wasn't necessarily a job of their choice, but they had to go someplace where they could make money quickly to contribute to the family finances. So ask them about whether there have been any shifts in their plans as a result of COVID-19. And also think about that transition if they have not yet gone back to work or haven't entered the workforce and now they're looking at doing that after COVID-19 or in the wake of, because we know where COVID-19 unfortunately is not over, but do they need some type of transition plan to help them with that process? So it could be that maybe they need some follow along services that they were done with, but maybe that now we need to revisit so that we can provide them with a higher level of support because they're going back to a different workplace. Maybe they have anxiety that they didn't have before, or the accommodations that they had were helping with their anxiety and they didn't need support, but now the anxiety symptoms that they had before have returned because we're living in just a very high stress, high anxiety provoking environment. And think about whether there are resources that they need to connect with. So in some cases, it may be that youth are juggling more. I have heard that employers have been putting more pressure on youth in some cases to work more hours, and sometimes that's actually interfering with their education. So we want to help them with making sure that they're able to advocate with employers for work, life, and school balance so that they are not working 40 hours a week at the cost of their education and are unable to complete their high school assignments or their college assignments. We want to make sure that they have good well care and that they are not becoming so stressed with work that they're no longer able to manage their stress level, and maybe it's causing them to have an increase of mental health symptoms. And we want to just allow time and space to the best that we can to be able to process some of the feelings that they're experiencing right now. Next. This is something you may have seen. This could look different. You could draw this on a piece of paper. You could find a way to do this virtually with a whiteboard. But setting an agenda is a really good way of helping to decrease anxiety for youth. And you want to just invite them to talk about anything else that they want to. So you may have something that you fill out and you share on a PowerPoint if you're going to be meeting virtually that says, here's some of the things that I want to talk about with you, and then leave one open that says your concerns and invite them to add something to the agenda, maybe a question that they have or a concern that they have that they can add at the end of the discussion. But I want to just put out there that the idea of having some sort of agenda, even if it's simple, can go a long ways in terms of increasing engagement because youth feel less anxious because they know what's coming next. Next slide. This is, again, a motivational interviewing technique. This is called the EPE technique. It works really, really well with youth, and it's really pretty basic, but the idea is that we're not soapboxing to them. And this is something, whether you're in person or you're virtual, you can be cognizant of when you're working with youth, is that you're asking permission before you share information. And so what you might want to do is ask them, is it okay if I tell you about some of the services that I can provide to you right now? And then if they say yes, which hopefully, and I think most of the time if you ask, they will, and they appreciate that you are giving them that choice, but you want to present them with some information. And one thing to consider is how you can visually display some of that, maybe with some interesting graphics on a PowerPoint slide or something that you could share with the youth. So if it's in person, it could be that you're sharing a handout with them. If you are meeting virtually, it could be that you send something to them in the mail, or you could use the PowerPoint slides. But then after you provide that information, you want to ask them if they have any questions. You want to ask them to reflect so that you can talk with them about what it is that you're sharing. So it's not just one-way delivery of communication, which we tend to sometimes do when we're presenting information, because we want to feel like, okay, I want to give them an idea. I want to show them that I'm an expert. And the idea with motivational interviewing and with engaging youth is that we have to help them to feel like they are part of the process and like you're not just giving something to them, but you're interacting and engaging with them and asking for their input. Next slide. This is the Readiness Ruler, and this is something that is pretty basic. Again, you could use this in different formats, but this is a screenshot of a way that you can find it virtually, which if you Google Readiness Ruler, motivational interviewing, you can find lots of different visual versions of this. And if you go into Zoom, you can actually go into the feature called it's annotating, and through annotating you could have them share. They could pick a little stamp and they could mark on that. You could use, I think there's another way of marking on it, but that would help you to actually show it to them virtually, and they could depict on the screen where they fall. But this is a way for them to rank, and this is really helpful because when youth can't put into words how they're feeling about something, this Readiness Ruler gives them a way to kind of express what's going on internally. So how are they feeling about change? How are they feeling about working? How are they feeling about whatever it is that you're there to talk to them about? Are they pursuing secondary and post-secondary education? You could ask them to compare, maybe they put one number on of how they were feeling about their future and their career plans prior to COVID-19. And then with another way of annotating, they could mark where they're feeling now as a result of COVID-19. But the important thing to follow up with is what would help you to get from whatever number they're at to another number. So what would help you if you're at a 5 now? What would help you to get to a number 8? And that gives you some idea of some of the supports you might be able to provide. So you can help them to think of maybe one small step that you could take with them to help them move a little bit further along that readiness scale. Next slide. Next slide. Sorry, there should be one coming up here about a confidence ruler. There we go, thank you. So this is just take for a moment and imagine, so put yourself in the shoes of the client and imagine that you're the youth sitting there, and just in the chat box, pop a quick number. Where's your confidence level in engaging youth virtually in the midst of COVID-19? So where are you feeling like you fall if you had to put yourself on this scale? How confident are you? 5, 8-ish, 7 to 8, 8, 7, 6, 5, 7. Yeah, it looks like a lot of you are falling mid to, oh, I see a 9. That's pretty good. Somebody's feeling pretty good. Maybe that 9 can share some tips with all of us about how to feel more confident with it. 9, I own a game store. Okay, gotcha. So you are our go-to of who we're gonna call. Everybody get Scott, is it Scott and a degree in theater. So we're gonna get Scott's email and try to figure out how to get some tips. But this just gives you some sense of sometimes, even if you couldn't describe in words, when you're able to just kind of use the scale and put a number to it, how it helps you. And you can kind of feel the internal struggle of like, oh, do I go with this or that? The good thing is that in using rating scales, and my background is in providing therapy to youth and to adults. But one of the things that I love about any of these rating scales, these Likert scales, is that they tend to be kind of consistent. And I forget, oh gosh, that goes back to grad school of what type of consistency that is. But internally, we have an internal consistency of how we rate ourselves. So it's a good way to compare with the same individual on another day, how they're feeling. So you could have a youth fill out this on one day, then work with them a little bit, and a few weeks later, have them fill it out again to see if the interventions that you're doing are making a difference in their confidence level or their readiness level, because it could give you some idea of how much progress you're making. Next slide, please. this is some information related to the scientific research on adolescence. And I think that adolescents have really historically gotten kind of a bad rap in terms of just how difficult they can be to work with. And I think there has been this sense that the personality by this age is already fixed. And so if you're dealing with a youth that's disengaged or that is maybe exhibiting some difficult behaviors, that it's going to stay constant. And that they're always, you know, okay, well, there's no hope. And when I worked in case management in foster care, it was like, okay, good luck with this youth because he's, you know, he's already on a path towards blah, 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 where we've already kind of projected what the future is going to be. But what they're finding in recent years, now that they can do brain scans, is that there is a second window of growth in the brain that takes place during adolescence. And between the ages of 11 and 24, the brain becomes more plastic. And so it's a different kind of development than what takes place in those early years before the age of 5. But what they're finding is the brain is adaptable. And so if you can provide a positive relationship and you can build skills in youth during that time, it can actually alter the life path. So if we are providing youth with support and services, and if we're engaging with them and building trust and building relationships, it can actually have an impact on their adult outcomes. So if they have not historically had positive relationships with adults, you could be the first person that shows them a different reality. And in some cases, the brain will adapt, and that youth will then be able to translate that into healthier relationships in other avenues of their life. So the really great thing about that is if you're working with a youth up till the age of 24, and I'm not saying it doesn't happen afterwards at all, but it's highly likely that there is an opportunity there to be able to make a difference and an impact in their life in whatever context it is that you are engaging with them. Next slide, please. And Lawrence Steinberg is, if you want to Google, Dr. Lawrence Steinberg has some great resources. He does some YouTube videos. He talks about the optimism of adolescence and has some really great brain research behind that. This comes from the Readiness Project partners, and what they looked at is the fact that we've now recognized that learning takes place not just in schools, but learning takes place everywhere, and learning involves hands-on relationships. And so the charge that they have given is that now is the time to think differently. So we need to be thinking about relationships and how we can improve relationships with youth. And we need to be thinking about how we can connect them to active learning experiences. So how can we get them out into the workplace, experiencing different things and hands-on rather than just talking about it? How can we get them out in the world learning some of those independent living skills? How can we see things differently? How can we see things through the eyes of the youth? And that means talking to them. How can we access youth? Maybe you can have forums. Maybe you can invite a group of youth to come in and talk with whoever is delivering services in your agency and making decisions, creating policies. How can you invite in the youth to talk about how we can use this time as an opportunity to do services differently for youth so that we can have different outcomes, so that we're not repeating the same mistakes we've made in the past? How can we build and connect services in ways that didn't exist in the past? So how can we turn COVID-19 on its head and have it as an opportunity rather than something that that is seen as a crisis or something that, you know, there's so much negativity attached to it? How can we turn it into something that's transforming? And how can we act differently? So how can we assess the ripple effect that one system has on another and talk about how those systems can have a better interconnectivity, how they can work together? How can we collaborate in new ways? And how can we create a shared sense with the youth of what matters? And you can see the link at the bottom if you're interested in reading about the Readiness Project partners. Next screen. This is something that comes from, I'm not sure, I'm trying to think whether this came from motivational interviewing or whether this came from, I know that this is used in cognitive therapy, but I really like this in terms of a nice activity to do with youth, because what these two circles do is this looks at everything that they have control of, and or everything that's going on in their life. So you have them write down everything that is bothering them, things that are a stressor to them, and they put in the middle what they have control over, and all the things they don't have control over go around the outside. So there's so many things related to COVID-19 that they don't have any control over. If you can get them to focus on some of those things in the center that they do have control over. So for example, maybe it's taking a step towards looking for a new job. Maybe it's looking in the paper, giving them some hands-on activity of something that they can do. It gives them a sense of regaining some control in some area of their life. And having that thing that they can do that helps them to take a small step can have a snowball effect, and they can build on that. So it can help them to get past that sense of hopelessness, and it can build a hopefulness because they see some forward activity versus this feeling of distorted time and of being stuck with no sense of the future. So sometimes I think it's important that even though we feel like youth should get a free pass because everything's so complex and difficult right now, it's actually the opposite. They oftentimes need something that we're giving them responsibility for, even if it's a small, just a small task that you're asking them to engage in, because it gives them a sense of future and hopefulness. Next slide.
Adene, we have 5 minutes. Thank you.
Okay. So thank you. So this is, this comes from some research that talks about individuals' specific characteristics that youth with high hopes have. And this is really, really great news to me, because this means that hope is not something that you just have or don't have. Like, sorry, if you don't have hopefulness, you're never going to have it. There are specific things, just like with empathy, that we can do to help youth to build these things. And so if you look at these things, a lot of these would translate nicely into goals that you have that you work on with youth, or skills that you can build. So generating multiple goals, coming up with alternate pathways to get to where it is that they want to be 10 years from now, engaging in ongoing skill development, calling on family and friends. So how can you help them to identify who's in their support network? All of those things can help them to get past that kind of learned helplessness that we sometimes see in individuals, especially for youth who feel like they have not made a lot of progress, and they feel like they kind of, their default is to become what seems to be unmotivated. Maybe they've been disempowered, and they need some sense of having something to look forward to and hopefulness. And so those are some things you can be working on. And next, the last slide here. These are some qualities I want to leave you with that come from SAMHSA, that are some characteristics that can be built into any program or any work that you do, any policy. You can be looking at them through this lens of how you can instill these characteristics. How can you build both physical and emotional safety? How can you build trustworthiness in your relationship with that youth? How can you build choice and offer a sense of control? How can you share power so that it doesn't feel like you're the expert who's doing to them, but you're working with them and finding out about them? And how can you recognize and build on their strengths? And so these are all things that I leave you with as a challenge in terms of characteristics, both individually as one person, but also collectively as an agency. How can you be instilling these different characteristics into your organization? And after this comes some takeaway tools that I'm going to leave with you, that are things that I created for other motivational interviewing presentations that I gave, that hopefully maybe some things that you can add to your toolbox that might work well if you're looking for some things that you can do to assess your motivational interviewing skills or to use with youth. And so if you want to just forward to the last slide has my email. And the email is, you can use that if you have any questions or comments. I'm sorry that we had to go through things so quickly, but I am definitely open to communicating with any of you that want to send me an email. And thank you so much for listening today. And thanks for inviting me.
Thank you, Adene. Thank you for a wonderful presentation. And I'd like to thank our audience also for your patience as we work through some technical challenges. We are going to take a break after the employer roundtables. So in a few minutes, we're hoping this is going to work this time. You'll be sent to the employer roundtables. So just we will look for your patience. Do remember that all of these presentations are on the Vermont Family Network webpage on the core pages. So those presentations are already sitting there. And if you have additional questions for either of our previous speakers, you're more than welcome to email them and correspond with them. So again, for those of you that may need a break, we are going to be taking a break later, but you certainly are welcome to do so if you feel that you need to. So thanks for your patience, and we'll wait till you're sent. So we'll take a breath. Let me see if there's anything else in our chat. Yeah, thank you, Adene. Thanks very much. Wonderful.
Okay. Due to some technical issues, there will be breakout rooms, but they're not going to be 100% how they were supposed to be. Combination of a few things that went wrong. I can start them. There will be a number of breakout rooms, including a group that will still be in here. So there will be different breakout rooms. Can't guarantee everyone is in the one they were supposed to. It's a combination of random plus people who are in their teams. Yeah, for some reason we kept losing people during the main session, and that also interfered with the room assignment. So I will start it up and we'll see how it goes. You'll all end up in a room, and it could still be this room as well. Again, I left a bunch of people in this main room, and then I broke people out as well. So
it'll be a learning experience for sure for all. Thanks, Kathy.
they'll be set to close after 30 minutes.